Welcome, everyone. So excited. See a few more people entering from the waiting room. Great to have you all here today. Welcome, welcome as we all get settled in. Well, good morning. Let's get started right away. We've got jam-packed information to fit into this hour, so we're going to get right at it. My name is Loreta Gerlach, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. And specifically, we're going to focus today on the area of assertive leadership in the high impact leadership professional micro-credential. Before we get started, just some housekeeping items. I am going to speak for about 45 minutes, giving you a bit of a teaser of the content that we have in the Assertive Leadership course. And then we'll reserve that last 15 minutes. If you've attended any of our other webinars, you know it's the same format. We'll reserve those last 15 minutes for questions and answers. We are recording the 45-minute presentation, and then we'll stop that recording for the Q&A. My pal and colleague Emma is going to help me with that Q&A by making sure that I see all the questions in the chat, and we encourage you to use that chat to share those questions throughout, and she'll make sure that I don't miss any of them at the end. We will also be compiling questions from the webinar just to make sure that we don't miss anything and do a quick check at the very end. I would ask if you do happen to have a camera on, in order to protect the bandwidth of our recording and our presentation, if you could turn your camera off, I would be extremely grateful. And of course, that will help. You may not want your camera on during the recording so that folks can see that forever. It'll just afford you some more privacy. The recording will be available about 24 to 48 hours after the session. And there is the contact information on the bottom of this slide and other slides. If you have any questions about anything after this presentation, whether it's about registration or programming at all, please direct your questions to Student and Instructor Services at the phone number or the email that is listed below, and they will make sure that it gets to the right person, whether that's myself or anyone else, to make sure that we're getting all your questions answered after. I do want to just take a moment for our territorial acknowledgement. The University of Regina is situated on the territories of the Nahiawak and Anishinaabeg nations, as well as the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis and Michif Nation. The University of Regina is on Treaty 4 lands with a presence in Treaty 6, and we are grateful for the opportunity to be on that treaty land today. So as I said to you before, my name is Loreta Gerlach. I have worked in both the credit and non-credit divisions of the University of Regina for over 18 years. I've had the privilege of doing many courses with non-credit division, as well as, of course, in various faculties, including the Faculty of Business Administration, Faculty of Arts, Faculty of Education, and the Johnson Chama Graduate School of Public Policy over my 18 years. I also am a human resource. All of that is done as a sessional instructor. I have a permanent role as a director in human resources in the public sector, where I work for the government of Saskatchewan. And I have over 20 years experience in human resources, as well as leading a variety of teams as small as 3 and as large as approximately 90. So all of that experience has allowed me to get a practical understanding of leadership. And of course, then I have this incredible opportunity of also having the academic understanding as well. So a little bit about what you can come to expect of us today. So we're going to just do a little short overview. I'm sure some of you have attended some of these webinars before, and so it will be very familiar for you. Others, this might be your first time. So I'm going to try to find that sweet spot in the middle where we can talk a little bit about CCE and our professional certificate seminars and programs. Then we're going to just give a high-level understanding of the micro-credentials and the badges and what a badge is. Then we're really going to dig in and spend the majority of our time talking about assertive leadership before we get to our question and answer. So I just wanted to take a moment here to talk a little bit more about the professional certificates that are offered through the Center for Continuing Education. I can't say enough, as someone who works in both credit and non-credit division and someone who works in human resources, at the incredible assets that this education is in terms of having affordable, reasonable access, not only to a variety of great instructors, but also, of course, incredible knowledge and skills that really help you make your career goals come true. We have a great hands-on experience that's provided. You get to do an adult learning model where you're learning from a variety of colleagues in different industries and areas. And so we can get you, all kinds of opportunities and perspectives that will help you build on your existing foundation of knowledge. Our professional certificates can be completed in as little as 4 months. Or you can take a couple of years to complete them as well. I believe the maximum is 3 years to complete from beginning to end. There are professional leadership and professional management certificates available, as well as you might just want to take individual seminars or one of the courses to be able to brush up on a particular area of skills that you are interested in. This is just directly, I cut and paste it right out of the CCE page. So I'm not going to spend the time but I just wanted to go through it, but I just wanted to make sure that I drew your attention that this has, if you go to the CCE webpage, we have the address there. You're going to get all the information you need. It's all very critical. Not only does it provide you this information about cost and which courses lead to which different program completion, but of course it'll have the particular dates that you seek to be able to make sure that you're registering on time. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the Microcredentials program. So this is a fairly new program to the University of Regina, and I just think it is such an incredible opportunity. I'm so excited to be part of it and with the group of people that are leading it through CCE as well as the other instructors, because this is an incredible opportunity for us to engage in continuous learning that will advocate all kinds of skill development in our communities, in our businesses, and for individuals as well. It really helps us target skills specifically for what we see as, a very dynamic and changing environment. Our modern organizational settings are changing very much. Certainly, we've seen dramatic change in the last couple of years, but of course, at the same time, we know that there's lots of opportunities for us all the time to be looking at things like tackling change, managing stress, ensuring that we're providing optimal customer or client service, making sure that we're engaged in process improvement, continuous improvement, and at the same time looking at how do we manage the success of our businesses and our industries during these challenging times, but at the same time supporting our employees and trying to engage and give them the sort of work environment that will allow us to build stable, powerful work environments as well. So the Microcredential program, as you can see here, we currently have 4 of them available. And how they work is each Microcredential consists of 3 badges. And so you can see them all listed here. So once you've completed a badge, you get digital recognition of that particular skill set that's been made available. And then you stack those badges to be able to achieve the actual Microcredential. The beauty of this is there's no prerequisite required. You can launch into any given one of them. And again, you can stack them up for the entire Microcredential, or you might just feel like you want to take advantage of one of these particular areas. These are industry recognizable and shareable. So they're things that you can put on your LinkedIn profile. You can put them on your resume. They're going to give you that edge and that competitive advantage when you're competing for positions, or even just trying to get people to come and join your teams or collaborate with you in different ways. So who are these for? Anyone who wants to commit to continuous learning, anyone who's looking to upskill, reskill, build their potential, looking for people who might want recognition in a specific set of skills they already have, but maybe aren't finding they're being recognized accordingly. People who want to add industry recognizable credentials to their education portfolio, folks that are looking for jobs that want to make sure that they're showing potential employers that they've got these incredible skills, and of course, anyone who just has that interest in any of these fields. Before I leave this slide, I'm going to pitch to you. As you can see today, we're really focused on the high impact leadership professional credential, because we're going to talk about assertive leadership, but I also teach the resilient leadership course under the responsive management professional microcredential, which is happening in 2 weeks. So if you want to join us there, please feel free, because that's another amazing and groundbreaking subject that I can't wait to talk to participants about. All right, so as we were saying, today we're here specifically looking at assertive leadership. And so that falls under the microcredential of high impact leadership. Leading in sort of any capacity, whether you have a formal leadership role like a manager or some kind of director or something like that, or even if you're an informal leader within your organization or your team, really requires a fairly complex skill set that we know is constantly evolving, especially in our modern organizational settings. So in the high impact leadership professional microcredential, this is where we teach a series of skills that we know employers highly value. And there's a lot of focus on things like assertiveness, of course, communication, consensus building, and other skills that will enable people to immediately apply the skills that they're learning to the positions that they hold. So we really do focus on creating understanding of organizational behaviors, power dynamics, and how to cultivate these healthy, positive, efficient relationships, even in the case of really diverse and complex settings, or sometimes difficult things that we need to do in terms of difficult conversations or solving complex problems. So what this microcredential and the courses that are associated with it do is allow you to facilitate very authentic and direct conversations in a manner that's not confrontational, that encourages others to collaborate, replicate that same sort of behavior, and get into really building teams that can get to that high performing stage of team dynamics. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on the one in the circle, the assertive leadership one. And we're going to do that by taking just a very small sample of the contents. We're going to just sort of take the very top off the various sections of what we would do in the real course if you should choose to register, and give you a little teaser, a little sampler of the different pieces that we're going to talk about when we dive into assertive leadership. All right, let's get to it. Whenever I talk to folks about assertive leadership, the first thing I want to do is talk about what assertive leadership is not. So many people misunderstand when they're interested in learning more about assertive leadership. They fall prey to thinking maybe that it's a real aggressive form of leadership, or that they just see themselves as being really passive and they want to get past a stage of being passive, which, you know, definitely there's a time and place for all of our different styles. But when we think about assertive leadership, I want to be clear that it's not about alienating yourself from others. We're still talking about leadership here. We're talking about building strong, healthy relationships with followers and stakeholders in a variety of diverse relationships, knowing that we want to create these inclusive environments. It's not about some kind of personal power. Like any understanding of leadership, we're still talking about that leader-follower dynamic, whether it's formal or informal. It's still about building, it's always about building relationships. And so what we want to do is strive for something that we call, and you might be familiar with this term, socialized power, where we're using our influence to be able to advance the interests of our organizations, but a number of people, and empower a number of people, and just be very influential. It's not about getting loud or feeling that you have a stronger way of being able to communicate with folks, but really it's about understanding our broader communication skills and how do we nuance those for a very specific style of leadership. It's not about being like powerful or disrespectful. It's about respect. It's about inclusion. And it's not about being pushy or demanding. It's about cultivating your emotional intelligence and relationship skills in a way that you can build healthy, strong relationships that can lead to high-performing teams and high-performing relationships. And last but not least, it's certainly not about aggression. It's about being persuasive and authentic and honest. So, assertive leadership, we don't have one single definition. It's not a particular theory of leadership or even a particular perspective of leadership, but rather what it is an application of a series of other leadership skills that will allow people to bring high levels of self-awareness and awareness of others to a wide range of experiences, skills, opportunities that will lead diverse employees and teams through complex, challenging, evolving organizational circumstances. So it really is about active, direct, specific, engaging, confident, respectful behaviors to drive relationships. Assertive leaders empower people by expressing honest opinions, by sharing experiences in a way that relates with other people. They offer perspectives of teamwork and collaboration. They collaborate and achieve strong communication and decision-making skills. They can advance complex things like culture changes or culture shifts and change management in very productive ways. However, what we do know is that assertive leadership begins with you. It's really about understanding your self-concept that we're going to talk about a little bit more. And the more you understand your self-concept and then use that self-concept to leverage several areas of leadership capacity and leadership skills, you can empower yourself to do things like give people clear expectations, coach other people in a way that they will truly feel empowered and grow, give feedback in healthy, productive ways without alienating other people. You can drive results. You can motivate and engage people. You can create environments that drive organizational commitment. You can strive for accountability for yourself and ultimately others. You can nip problems in the bud because you have the skills to get in front of them before they escalate into other things. And basically, we can represent ourselves, our ideas, our needs in a way that doesn't alienate the people around us. So that's what we're looking at. We're trying to strive to this very specific style of leadership by looking at how do we specifically leverage things you already know that are associated with leadership in a particular way to build your assertive skills. So I mentioned that this starts with self-concept. So let's look at some of these building blocks of assertive leadership, starting with the very foundational one of self-concept. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, if you use these terms yourself regularly or not, but if you know what our self-concept is, it's really this way that we understand ourselves. It's how we look at our beliefs around who we are and how we assess the things that we do and how we feel about things that we achieve on a regular basis. And we do this by assessing ourselves about our current state. This is my perceived self and who I am today. And this is my ideal self that I want to be. And so we look at assessing ourselves in terms of that journey. This is what would be ideal. This is what I did today. So then I come up with an evaluation of how I feel. We do this regularly on a daily basis, but we have a larger scale self-concept as well. It's interesting because it's very complicated. One of the reasons it's very complicated is, of course, we have many selves at play all the time. I'm sure many of you that are here today will think about things like, for example, you have a professional identity in the workplace, but you have other sense of selves that are really important. You might have family relationships or friend relationships. Maybe you have other areas of your identity that are really important. You might be an artist, you might be an athlete. And so we're constantly looking at all of the things that we do and trying to kind of combine those into one healthy idea of who we are in a realistic way. One of the challenges that we struggle with, if we're just going to be honest, is we have a self-concept of who we are. And generally speaking, we feel like, well, I'm realistic about that, but sometimes we miss the mark. Sometimes we might think that we represent in a particular way, but folks around us don't see us the same way. And so from an assertive leadership perspective, one of the things we want to do is do better at that. Try to understand, how do I reconcile my self-concept with what I see, what other people see or consider about me? A lot of times for many of you, your self-concept might be, how do we say, less than what people think. So you have less confidence in yourself than the people around you do. And that is definitely something we want to correct if you want to be perceived as an assertive leader. But conversely, occasionally, sometimes we see ourselves as being even better at certain things or stronger at certain things than those around us do as well. And if we can also develop the same skill to reconcile that and get ourselves with an accurate perspective of how those perceive around us, this will also help us with our assertive leadership. So what we want to do is find, ways that we can get a really strong and clear understanding of our self-concept to help us with just our personal well-being, but also, of course, improve our leadership performance. So as you can see here, when we get together in the face-to-face, it's not face-to-face, I guess our next sessions are remote, but when we get together in the actual course, we actually break down our self-concept into a lot of specific details. And so as you can see here, one of those is our social self. So try to get a really good understanding of how do we define ourselves with the groups that we easily identify with, how do we recognize what our status is within those communities? How do we reconcile when we might have a minority status in particular situations, and how do we perceive ourselves? How are we comfortable with some of those minority statuses? And by minority status, I just mean one that doesn't have that level of power and influence in a specific circumstance. So we want to take a deep look at, how does that sense of identity emerge, and how do we understand how that affects both our attitudes and our behaviors on a regular basis. The second one is self-enhancement. So this is, that sort of higher level can-do belief that we have. How do we see ourselves as, decision makers? How do we see ourselves as players in the world around us? How do we perceive our role in causation of events that happen around us? Are we capable of recognizing mistakes? Are we, do we see ourselves as being really competent? Do we see ourselves as being, sometimes people will see themselves as being really lucky. When is it luck? When is it actually achievement? And so all of this is things that we do to kind of promote our own positive self-view, but how do we then, make sure that that information is evidence-based and that we're using all the talents we have to actually create that positive self-view in an accurate way. The third is self-evaluation. And so this is where we start to talk about some really critical things. When I teach university classes for credit, this is one of the single most important. I tell business students every day that this is maybe one of the most important things that we teach in business education, is this idea of self-evaluation. So self-evaluation is broken into three key factors. One of those is your self-esteem. And self-esteem is, of course, that extent to which you feel like people like, respect you, how satisfied are you with yourself and those relationships with other people? If you have good, strong, high levels of self-esteem, you're less likely to be influenced by other people. You can depend more on logical thinking and trust your gut more. And so if you have a higher level of self-esteem, it will assist you in being a more assertive leader, because you won't be worried about what will happen when you make decisions, when you approach people, when you have conversations. And so we really want to dig into, where does that self-esteem come from? And how do we make sure that we're focused on having a good, solid way where we're comfortable with ourselves, and we're creating space where that authenticity that we're going to talk about in just a moment is something that is really something we're digging into and counting on a regular basis. The second piece of that is self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is just that idea that you believe in yourself and that you can do the tasks and things that are expected around you. Think about if I gave you something that you've never done before. Maybe I asked you to knit a scarf. If you were to start knitting a scarf, your instinct, if you've never knitted before, and I give you some yarn and knitting needles, would be, oh, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to knit a whole scarf. And so you have no self-efficacy in that case. But if we spent a bit of time, if we taught you what are the skills involved with it, gave you a chance to practice, and then said, go knit a scarf, your self-efficacy would increase. We do the same thing in life all the time, right? And so what we want to do is build that self-efficacy, which will give us the confidence to be able to do the things we want to do. And so self-efficacy fits nicely with assertive leadership, because the more confidence we have that we can have difficult conversations, that we can cultivate task-based conflict and be able to lead people to really solid problem solving in the face of a lot of diverse opinions, for example, then we're going to be more comfortable at that. We're going to talk more about that. And the third piece, and maybe the single most important piece of the issue of self-evaluation, is the issue of locus of control. So our locus of control is that general belief that we have over our personal control over life events. And so if you imagine, let's say we're in this session together now, and I am literally the worst instructor you've ever had. Maybe true. Maybe I am the worst presenter. I'm completely inarticulate. I'm not making sense. Someone who has a self-efficacy where they're really externally focused would say, wow, that was really terrible. That person Loreta wasted an hour of my life. Loreta took away from me an opportunity to learn about assertive leadership in a way that was really difficult. And we do that all the time. Think about a bad boss or a bad teacher or bad coach, or even, I don't know, lots of other opportunities that you might have in your, personal lives and relationships. But what we want to do is strive for a really strong internal locus of control, where even in the face of a difficult situation, like Loreta giving the worst seminar you've ever had, you still have an opportunity to benefit from that. So it might be, hey, you know what? I do a lot of training myself, or I do a lot of public speaking, and I learned a lot about what not to do from how terrible Loreta was. And so it's just taking that lens on the world, and instead of saying, hey, these bad things happen to me, or difficult or challenging circumstances happen to me, there's nothing I can do about it because I'm surrounded by people who maybe are rude or incompetent, and really taking that inner view to be like, hey, this is my opportunity to control this situation, to frame the opportunities that exist even in the face of challenge, of opportunities that I have to become stronger and more powerful every day. And so we'll talk lots about that as we get into the face-to-face course. And the last but not least is this idea of self-verification. And so that's just the things that we do every day to maintain this whole self-concept. We want to feel stable in how we see ourselves. And so we're always looking for information for people around us to, be able to verify that they see us the way we want to be seen. So we want to look for feedback that will confirm that. And we want to look for opportunities to convey to others how we want them to see us. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So all of this, we'll dig in deeper about how do you do that? And then how do you move that forward? How do you do things like be open to change, give yourself opportunities for growth while still giving yourself the grace and the opportunity to make mistakes, developing things like networks with other people that we can learn from, friends, supporters, mentors. How do we safely strive to improve some of these experiences while still, towards our ideal self, while still protecting ourselves, where we're not going to feel, stressed out or like we're not doing enough now. So how we don't want to compare ourselves to others' journey. How do we craft our own journey in a way that is going to be one that at every stage just gets better and better? We don't want people saying, oh, I thought I was great, and now I've done some self-reflection and I'm not great. And then you get, stymied. We want to recognize that everybody brings value now, and there might even be opportunities to improve upon that, or not. Maybe you've got it all now. That's okay too. What we know is that strong and realistic self-concepts have a direct link in your well-being and your ability to lead with confidence. Then you can be true in action and words and inspire others to also assert their selves. And this is where we're going to be able to transcend those things I talked about earlier about being too passive or too aggressive, because it's ways that we can consciously develop new habits, new processes that allow us to pivot away from some of those things that might be holding us back from being really strong, assertive leaders. So I dug a little deeper on that one. Now I'm just going to touch on a few of the other things that we would get into a lot more detail with. So just to give you a bit of a teaser of some of the elements that build together to create assertive leaders. So the first is authenticity. So once we understand our self-concept and we have a good, solid, and comfortable position there, we can turn our minds to authenticity and becoming an authentic leader. If you've had an opportunity to read or study about leadership, before, you probably know that leaders often sort of default to a particular style they favor. So if you've studied, it might be that, some folks really want to be transformational leaders, or some folks want to be what are called servant leaders, or, maybe you prefer being a managerial leader. These are all terms we can get into in the face-to-face course, and you may have heard in other courses as well. But the key to understanding, you can favor a specific style of leadership, but what we know from a leadership perspective is leaders have to be able to understand when they need to pivot, and they need to be flexible for individual followers as well as individual circumstances. And so we want to be able to cultivate that ability to have a comfortable leadership style that is still flexible and able to pivot upon requirement, but in an authentic fashion. And so authenticity comes from, first of all, that, engagement in self-reflection. We also get that from finding where we're comfortable, getting feedback from trusted sources. So when we talk about authenticity, we're looking at genuine, purposeful, values-based leadership. People want to be consistent, and people want you to be consistent as well. The folks around you count on you and count on what they can expect for your reactions, your decisions, your support. And so this is fundamentally tied to the relationships we build and the value that we hold to those. We want to build those genuine relationships. I always think of a story. Years ago, I was working in a nonprofit, and we were loaned space in another nonprofit. So I had, you had free space, office space in the middle of this other office. And those people had a boss, and they would get together every morning, and they had a commitment to not speak out loud to anyone until someone knew who the boss was that day. And what they meant by that was sometimes their boss was super kind and engaging and supportive, but sometimes she was really angry and aggressive. And usually how she presented in the morning was how she presented all day. And so that team struggled with understanding who their leader was authentically. They didn't feel confident of how that person would react on a consistent basis, to the point where they would actually, as a collective, choose not to speak until they could assess the situation. And then they were engaging in what I would consider, frankly, gossip behind the boss's back to try and share information. I just had a conversation and this is what it was like and this is how. That's an incredibly difficult and unhealthy workplace environment. And so as leaders, what we want to do is, first of all, avoid being that person ourselves, but also create team members who have confidence in us, but then ultimately, and we'll talk about this later, could also approach us and have conversations when they don't have that security, and they are then able to role model the same behaviors that we're showing about having honest and truthful conversations. So assertive leadership truly is foundational for people to build relationships so they can handle difficult situations and have those tough conversations. Authentic leaders walk the talk. They're honest. They maintain strong relationships through influence and mutual understanding. They're above average communicators, and they are able to be there and role model behaviors that will then ripple through the team. So how do we become more authentic? We'll talk more about how that works as well. We want to develop our own style for sure. We don't want to be drawn into the interests or styles of other people. We want to anchor with our personal values and then engage in self-discipline to support that kind of values-based leadership. And of course, we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to maintain our own positive self-evaluation. One of the ways that we can do that and cultivate some of these relationships and foundations is by the exercise of emotional intelligence. So I'm feeling like most of you have probably heard the terminology of emotional intelligence before, and you've probably spent some time talking about it and studying it. So we will breeze over this one fairly quickly, but we would be remiss not to talk about how emotional intelligence helps us in garnering feedback from other people, cultivating our authentic self, and then doing other things I'm going to talk about next, like being inclusive and being a great communicator and managing conflict. So what you see here are basically the elements of emotional intelligence. And we often think of emotional intelligence as existing on a hierarchy. So at the very lowest level, we want to achieve that before we can move up this hierarchy. And so if we look at the way I've posted this on the PowerPoint slides, on the bottom, you see there's some awareness of our own emotions and those emotional triggers. That's foundational. The idea is if we're not good at that, we're probably not going to be good at the rest of it. So we want to make sure that we have a legitimate understanding of what some of our emotional challenges are. What are things that trigger us? What are those, drivers of our values that often exist in emotions? So we know that emotions are a little bit different than attitudes because they're usually very quick. They come up. We often don't have a lot of control of them when they happen. We don't know why they're happening. And so then we want to look for ways that how do we manage at the next level those emotional moments when they happen. So, I hate to use such a cliche example, but think about when you're watching a commercial and, I don't know, somebody's I always think of the Budweiser commercials and the Clydesdales making friends with the puppy, and you're watching that and then you tear up and maybe you cry. So you're aware that, cute moments with things like animals or children or family events might trigger an emotional reaction. And then you find ways to manage that, because maybe when you're sitting around watching TV, it's okay to break into tears because you see a sad commercial. But what if that same thing happens in the workplace? Would you want to break into tears? Maybe, depending on your environment, but usually not. And so when we think about things that might make us sad, mad, frustrated, scared, insecure, we want to make sure that we're looking for ways to achieve that. I know when I was younger, I would very much if I couldn't control a circumstance, I would become very anxious about that. And I would quickly become anxious. And so I had to find ways to control my anxiety, right? To recognize that I can't control all circumstances. And what I can do is reframe my thinking. I have opportunities to reframe my thinking. I have opportunities to communicate where I need clarification. I have opportunities to take confidence in what I can handle and manage now and what I can't. You know, that took a while for me to get a handle of managing those emotions. And so then as we get good at handling and managing our own emotional triggers and reactions, we can then imagine what that's like for other people. Sometimes it's people we know. And so I have a partner and I know what makes him mad and sad and frustrated. And so it's easy for me with someone I've lived with for 15 years to be able to respond accordingly. But we don't always have the luxury of knowing someone that well, especially in organizational settings. And so then this is where we think, how would others, maybe perceive this? What are the possibilities for someone to experience here? And this is where, I hope that this will be sure to upset some of you, and I mean no disrespect, but this is where the golden rule did not serve us well. If you're familiar with that golden rule, which is like do unto others as you would have them do unto you, this is emotional. It's very anti-emotional intelligence, because how I might react to a particular situation might be very different than how something might happen for you. And so what we really want to do is perceive what do unto others as they need us to do unto them. And so through that, we can actually manage and influence and persuade people's attitudes and behaviors, because we can accommodate, for them. And so what we want to do is cultivate these skills, which will help us in things like delivering feedback with sensitivity and allow people who have, for example, performance deficits or problems with projects to feel like they're receiving feedback in a way that they're still supported and they don't feel alienated. Assertive leaderships develop these skills in a manner that allows them to not hesitate and delivering the information that needs to be delivered, but in an honest and supportive way that will be received by that audience member. And so we want to spend some time cultivating that. Oops. I just want to talk briefly about a couple of other things before we turn over to questions. One of them is, of course, as you master the concepts and skills for things like your self-concept and for sure emotional intelligence, it will also help you cultivate communities of diversity and inclusion. I've just used this quote here off the internet. I've included the link to say that diversity, we want to create diverse teams that give us lots of challenges and opportunities, and inclusion strategies are how we make those diversities really result in innovation and growth. And so inclusion is highly tied to assertiveness, and we want to make sure that we've got those skills as well. Communication, so I'm sure lots of you have studied purposeful communication. We do lots of training through CCE about business communication and different styles of communication. So I'm not going to get into that here, but I did just want to highlight to you that there is a strong link. You might already see yourself as having strong communication skills, but we can leverage some of that to optimize your assertiveness. So if we think about purpose-driven communication, using your emotional intelligence in that communication, but also then engaging in specifically, how do I use those communication skills to optimize that audience focus? How do I deliver difficult news to people? How do I assert my own interests and needs in a specific circumstance in a way that will resonate with that audience? How can I cultivate that communication such that I'm going to get the sort of feedback that I want to get from others? Same with conflict orientation. So many people assume conflict is bad and they try to avoid it. What we do in assertive leadership is understand, that conflict can be useful and it can be healthy organizational behavior. But what we want is task-based conflict, not relationship-based conflict. So we want to cultivate all of those skills, using values, using norms that teams can develop together to encourage the use of conflict for creativity, for problem solving, for innovation. And so honing our ability to communicate problems, to identify root causes without alienating people. You know, we don't want people to lead to a sense of loss or positional, I have to protect my place in this, but we want to create spaces where we can have difficult and challenging conversations where everyone's got that win-win orientation. When we solve problems, everybody wins. When we compromise, everybody loses. And when we avoid, which so many people who find themselves more on the passive side of leadership, you know, then we don't solve problems at all. So what we want to do is optimize our ability to solve problems and ultimately, of course, also create opportunities for ourselves. So when we come together, that wraps up sort of our orientation. We would get together and pull all of that together in the course to see how we can use it for many of these specific tools and others. And that would be how we would spend our latter part of the course time together. So what we have here is just a quick outline of how the course flows when we meet face to face. And so we would come together and just get into a lot more detail of the things that we've highlighted here today. And this, just before we move to questions, I didn't want to forget this important side, encouraging you to follow CCE on social media. Here we have all of our links, making sure that you're following us in all of these channels, looking for information as it gets updated regularly. You can keep learning and join the email list by visiting us on our website, of course, if you have any questions or concerns, as we said at the beginning, we have the phone number and email here. And if the folks at SIS aren't the right folks, they will make sure your question goes to the right area.